Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the COVID Data Challenge, Data and Training Challenge Showcase 2020. I'm very glad to have you with us. Thank you for joining us. We have folks from about 20 over countries, 50 over media companies, and 6 universities signed up today. So we're expecting quite a lively group. And we hope that you've come with your questions as well for the teams. I'd like to maybe share with you what the background is to this webinar. Essentially, this is the culmination of 4 training sessions that we've had since late April. Between April and May, we had 4 training sessions conducted by Kwang Keng Kwek Sir, our data trainer in Malaysia. And he took the group through a variety of techniques and topics and with a specific objective of using and harnessing COVID-19 data sets that are widely available. He also showcased to us a great variety of good and bad examples across the world to see how data can be harnessed and should ideally be harnessed as well. So we had great stuff, and we had also the what not to do stuff from him, which is very, very enlightening. And from these sessions, this was a bit of an unconventional training in that we had these sessions which were like 2 hours long and then followed by a 1 hour hands-on practice. And then after the 4 sessions, there were also additionally coaching sessions which King made himself available, where groups, individuals who took part in this training program, 30 over participants from about 6 different cities took part in this, and they could sign up for these slots with him for one-on-one sessions to further fine-tune their projects. So out of this culmination of about 2 months worth of sessions, we now have these 3 projects which we're very, very happy to share with you as a showcase. Some have been published, some have been adapted for publication, and some have not been published yet. So I think you have a very nice sort of scope of, you're getting to see some behind the scenes stuff. And we have with us as well the people behind these projects who will take us through the whole process of how they came and how they arrived at this. And of course, before we continue and before we bring on the groups and the participants, I'd like to give a big thanks to Google News Initiative for making this very unique training program possible. Without their help, this would really not have been possible, and we've had a wide range of participants from from over a dozen media companies taking part in about 6 cities. Very quickly, if I could just call on King, would you like to say anything before we start this showcase?
Okay, thanks Junie, thanks WAN-IFRA and Google News Initiative for putting this together. It was a very fortunate opportunity for me because I was then stuck in the state of Johor during the movement control restrictions in Malaysia. But I think what we are trying to achieve from this online training course is that you don't just come and attend the training course and you go back and then business as usual, right? So what we are trying to achieve is actually, you come, you pick up some new skills and knowledge, you go back and you try to implement it, you try to use those skills in your everyday job, and you try to enhance your storytelling with those skills and knowledge. So that's why we, after the online course, we actually have the coaching sessions for everyone. And we have this challenge, to encourage everyone to publish something. You don't even have to publish it, just create something, using the skills, the tools that you have learned. And I think through this way is a better way of, just attending the online course. You actually have the chance to put in use, all the things that you have learned. And today is the day that we can see, the efforts put in by journalists and also the results of our training course.
Yes, thank you very much, King. I think it's quite a very interesting journey, and congratulations to all the participants of this course who have been on this since the course started in April. I think we've seen very, very interesting ideas come out of it, and also I've enjoyed the interaction between the course participants. So if you take part in the course, you don't just come to the course and just say, okay, I want to learn from the trainer. But I think very, very most importantly is the participants also learn from each other. So we saw a lot of very lively interaction between the participants saying, oh, I know I've tried this before. Why don't you try that? Or here's a data set I've just discovered. Here's a really good data set, or here's a really crappy data set, and just exchanging ideas. So that is really the value of doing a live session, whether it's in person, ideally in person, but of course, if it's not possible, as in this case right now, we're doing this online. So that has been very, I think, productive and very enriching for everyone. So after the different entries, King has also given us actually offered to give us a bonus talk on investigating the pandemic's impact on vulnerable and marginalized communities using data. So he's been seeing this new trend right now emerge where newsrooms are not just showing and presenting the basic data, but they're just investigating the inequalities that result as well using data. So I think that's the next level, taking storytelling to the next level to use the data to showcase this. So looking forward to his talk as well. What we'll do right now is open the floor to Ray Kurohi of Straits Times. She has put in 2 entries for this showcase, and please, after she presents, please have your questions for her. Feel free to use the question and answer box, the Q&A box in there, and then we'll use the chat for other housekeeping stuff. But for questions, I think it's a lot easier if you use the Q&A box so that we can keep track of it. If your question is pretty long, or it's a bit sort of hard to put all in text, please just raise your hand, and we'll be able to switch on your mic for you. Okay, over to you, Ray.
Hi, I'm Ray. I'm a political journalist at ST. Previously, I was a health journalist, and I've got 2 map graphics to share with you today. Okay, so this first one that we've got, as you can see, it was not complete, and it in fact wasn't published, but this one is the Singapore COVID-19 clusters in foreign worker dormitories and work sites. So I prepared this for a story package we were working on dorm and worksite clusters. Yesterday, I think the latest tally in Singapore was that we had about 44,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19. At the end of May, middle to late May, when I was working on this, we had about 35,000. And about 90% of those cases actually involved foreign workers. Around the time, the new cases coming out every day was in the range of a couple hundred a day. And we hit a daily high of 1.4 thousand in April 21st. So if you're not that familiar with the COVID situation in Singapore, the cases among foreign workers actually only really began to balloon in early April. And before that, our clusters were mostly quite local. And so by this point, we had already done some graphics on the clusters among the locals, but we wanted to show, the scale and the spread of these quickly emerging new clusters involving workers, especially those living in high-density dormitories. Now that became a big talking point and the focus of a lot of public discussion about the virus in Singapore. So I worked on this with our art department, and before we got to this version, I actually had prepared a version on Google My Maps. So here I charted each of the dormitory locations, and I've color-coded them according to the type. So you've got your larger 1,000 bed or more dormitories. These are regulated under the Ministry of Manpower's feeder law. And then you've got smaller dormitories, you've got construction sites, and you've got industrial sites. So as you can see, we roughly divided these into five regions. So you've got this kind of cluster of clusters, you might say, in the west here, mostly to do with the Jurong Island industrial processes. You've got another big cluster of clusters in the north region here, and then a smattering of clusters in the northeast, in the east, and in the central region as well. So what I was struck by when I put this together is actually how diffuse all of these clusters are. They're all over the island, right? And I think I'm guilty of this too. Many of Singaporeans probably think of foreign workers and their dormitories as being kind of remote or distant problems that don't really affect their everyday lives. But the truth is that the foreign workers live and work among us. And this is something that I wanted to show in this graphic that I worked on. So even though this is quite a simple concept, you've just got a map and you've got the locations and you've got the case numbers and tables beside it. Putting this information together was actually not that easy. Now, MOH was releasing the official data every day, but it didn't present it in a very friendly format. So here's an example I'll show you of how MOH displayed its daily updates in its press release. And you can see that the numbers are kind of given in prose. You've got some numbers that are spelled out ONESIX, and you've got some that are numerals. And it's all done in this like single line kind of format. This is 4 pages long. This is just for one day. And every day this will come out. You get a new version of this every single day. So in the early days of the crisis, when the new cases every day were about, numbering in the tens instead of the hundreds, it was actually quite easy for myself and my colleagues to fill in the spreadsheet manually. But of course, as the new cases started to hit hundreds, it became tedious and impractical, and it would take us very, very long to compile this. Now, the saving grace of these press releases is that they actually follow a very consistent format, if you notice. So it's always the new number of additional cases or the earlier cases, and then it says are linked to, and then the cluster name, address, comma, which has a total of number confirmed cases now. So it's very, very consistent, and I'm very grateful for this, because what I was able to do is just grab this entire thing, copy it, and I found this free text extractor tool online. So I could paste this in here, and as you know, a PDF, it breaks up the lines every other line here, even though it's not a full sentence. So I'm just going to clean that up. I can demonstrate that live. Grab that, and put that back in here, and there we go. So now we have every line divided by the full stop is its own line. And what I've done is I've told the tool to give me all the text strings in between the word cluster at and comma which has, as well as the string in between total of and confirmed cases. So once I run that, I get a very nice clean format like this, where you have the cluster name, the address, a semicolon, and then the number. So this I can import into a spreadsheet. And so I was able to do this for each of the press releases going back to the early days and import that into a spreadsheet. So for this graphic, we were mostly interested in just the latest total tally. So the only thing else that I had to do was delete off the duplicate entries. So I was only left with the most recent number. So for this graphic again, the final piece, I tried to value add a little bit. So I did a bit of research on the total number of the total residency or the total capacity in each dormitory. So we've put that next to the total number of cases, and you can see out of 16,000 in this dormitory, there are 1,300, and that gives you a sense of the scale within that dormitory as well. Now, so unfortunately, as I mentioned, this graphic was not published, and that's because the story package that we were working on it changed as we went along. And by the time we reached the final version, we didn't need a map for the package anymore. So this never ran in print, and you're the first to see it publicly. Okay, so the fact that I think as a journalist, when I joined journalism, I always thought of storytelling as being, writing words, as telling a story through language. But I think map graphics are really what gets me excited. So for my second project, I also did a map graphic. And this is something that I worked on for our general election, which is coming up in just over a week. Now, if you're asking yourself, what does a general election have got to do with COVID-19? You may know that Singapore is holding its general election amid the COVID-19 pandemic, which is ongoing. And as such, it's been called a social media election, quite fittingly, I think, because all the major events have been unfolding online, from candidate introductions to e-rallies, and just last night we've had a live debate. Actually, the story for that is just over my shoulder here. And so in the weeks leading up to nomination day, which is when the candidates are officially confirmed, I was hard at work trying to identify, with the help of my colleagues, some of the potential new faces who may become first-time candidates. So just to give you a look under the hood, this is the spreadsheet that that powers all of that. You've got the candidate names, their parties, their age, occupation, and so on. And so I spent a couple of weeks trying to put together the names that we suspected, or we spotted them on a walkabout or something like that. And I've compiled all of these into the spreadsheet. So for the incumbent MPs as well, for the returning candidates, I've also got the data for their previous election performance. So this is all taken from the official data.gov dataset. Oh, the same with the geographical data, the GeoGSON. So I was able to convert that using some of the tools that King shared during the webinar. So here's the data set that I got from the government, and you can see it goes all the way back even to pre-independence, all the results of every single candidate who's ever participated in a general election. And I was able to pull that, scrape that, and put that together. So given that we didn't have any idea when the election was going to be called, in Singapore we don't have fixed terms, and the election can be called at the behest of the Prime Minister. So there was a lot of speculation about the date. There was a lot of questioning whether we would actually be in a COVID election or whether it would be called only after the crisis had passed. And so as you can imagine, a lot of this changed very quickly. So the intel that we were hearing on the ground on this candidate's going to run in this constituency or that constituency, that can change every other day. And so before we even get to the point where we can present this to the public, we had this difficulty of keeping track of all these movements. Now, putting it together in a Google Doc, it's possible, and that's what we did. And so you can see here we've got a doc where we tried as much as possible to list down who's going where. But this is not very easy to kind of see at a glance, all the information. So I realized that we actually needed a graphic for our internal reference, and that's actually the version you see that I showed earlier, this gray map. So using the data set I compiled, I built this one using Flourish Studio. So that's a free data visualization tool that King introduced during the webinar. And so I've got another spreadsheet separate from the previous one. This one was for my colleagues, so this is presented in a more, you can say, user-friendly format. We've got some conditional formatting here. So if I change the party name, you can see that the cell's gonna change color in a second. And this I shared with my colleagues on the ground, and they could fill in the names here with their best predictions, their best guesses as to who's going where. So this nice and colorful one feeds this table back end, and this in turn feeds the Flourish data set that powers that graphic. So if you hover over each of the constituencies, you can see the names, which is all taken by formula, of course, and the previous performance of that constituency. Now, as I mentioned, this map is purely for internal reference, but the exact same spreadsheet and data set is then used to power our public-facing graphic. And that was just published on Tuesday, which was nomination day, the final one. And I was the only reporter working on this, gathering the information, but I have to give a lot of credit to our web developers for putting the visualization together. Let me show you what that looks like now. And so this is very nice. It's still a little bit out of my league, I think. I need to attend a few more of King sessions before I can build this on my own. But it's 100% automatic, as you can see, the way that these maps are generated. So we thought that it would be better to show the maps for each party individually rather than having it all in one, because then you'd have to hover over each constituency to see who is there. This way you can see that the incumbent ruling parties contesting all the seats, of course, and this party is mostly in the west side here, this party is mostly in the east side here. So there are little bits of data. If you scroll down, you can see the candidates for each of the constituencies, and each of them, there's a little bit of data, a little tag that tells you who comes first in the order, who gets these new face tags, and so on. It's usually based on seniority, but not always the case. And if you click through, you've got a little bio for each of the candidates with their age, how long they've been in office, their occupation, their past performance, and their team members. So actually, this is where you get to see the product of my blood, sweat, and tears. So if you haven't seen this one already, it's called Battleground Singapore. You can find this on the Straits Times website. Okay, so that's about it. I've got about 2 minutes to spare, but I think I've said pretty much what I want to say. So thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Ray, for your very impressive projects and also keeping to time. Maybe what we could do is hand over the floor to Tempo to present their project. And then after that, we will take questions from the audience so that the audience have had the benefits of seeing all three projects at one go. I'd like to introduce now to you Tempo's team, which has submitted the next project. Ferdi Estarida is the project lead and writer, and she has with her today Krishna Padipta, who is the data visualizer and the producer of this project, and Shalendra Prasada, who is the editor of this published project, which they will now present to you. Over to you, Ferdi and Krishna.
Okay, hello everyone. Before I start the story about the half-heart social distancing, I would like to introduce myself and my team. My name is Ferdi, and I was the project lead and the main reporter for this story. And Shalendra Prasada from Tempo National Desk was the editor for this project, and Krishna, my colleague from Tempo Media Lab, was in charge for data visualization. We are the team from Tempo.co, the online arm of the Tempo brand. Okay, this is our story, and this is already published. The background of the story is early on we decided that we tackle the large-scale social distancing ensured that President Joko Widodo had enforced in Indonesia. The LSSD, knowing locally as PSBB, was interesting middle ground, put the country half of the lockdown. Activity are still permitted, but economy work grounded to help. The president called the measure the best way to suppress the spread of COVID-19 in the country. After enacting the LSD for the 3 months starting in April, the president decided to reopen the country. He had the push the reopen starting that several province who enacted to the LSDD had a successful contain the virus. So this is our and then so we decided to put the test at the first. We wanted to test how the effectivity how to the effectivity the LSDD protocol itself was. So we accurate survival data set such the IPI for the Indonesia case count and Google mobility index and the positive rate of the Jakarta to create an initial case study. This is the total case in Indonesia. We're talking about the PSBB. as the large-scale social distancing ensure. And then, but however, we realized that the rising rate of the positive case doesn't necessarily show the suppression of the COVID-19. So the angle we changed to describe how the LSDD work in data form. Now, I will pass on discussion about how we made the graphic to my colleague Krishna.
Okay, hello. I produced the visualizations for this story. So we changed the angle, right? So after one of the thanks trainings is to like kind of create a hypothesis before you make something like this. So it was important for us to kind of whittle down because Indonesia's COVID case is kind of huge in respect to data. There's huge data sets and it's kind of spread everywhere. So we had to kind of focus on an idea, and after we changed the angle, that idea became really easy to discuss. So we have in our, I'm just gonna share my screen. We have in our story a couple of graphics here. So we wanted to kind of track because the LSSD is quite a weird thing that no other country, I think, has done. It's kind of like a weird middle ground. So we kind of want to describe that through data, right? So tracking that. Sorry, I have the Indonesian version for some reason. Right. So in order to track that, we kind of used Jakarta as a case study, and because Jakarta is kind of the, if you go to the Indonesian case count from the central government, this is the only thing that loads. So, and the other ones don't really load. So whereas in Jakarta, it's really, really complete. Like this is just all of Jakarta, and they kind of divided into bars. That was really useful for us. So we decided to kind of see how the LSSD worked and by using Jakarta as a case study. For the current COVID-19 cases here, right? This is an API that we kind of took from the central government because while I think Ray mentioned that Singapore continually has public releases on the state of COVID in the country, we have that too, but they do kind of press releases where they announce, okay, this is the new positive cases. They don't really have that kind of press release, right, for us on hand. Instead they have this API thing that the health ministry gave, so we had to access that in order to in order to show the continually rising positive cases. So we did this using JSON and kind of D3 in order to do that. Sorry. Right, and moving on, this is from Flourish. We created to kind of like, what is the LSSD anyway? So the red shows things that are exempted, and the yellow is things that are still allowed to operate, but in a reduced rate, right? So here as well, we kind of used SVG and kind of just dumped red CSS on it. And okay, so this is the most kind of hard part that we did for this story. This is kind of like we were tracking the spread of COVID-19 through Jakarta, because Jakarta's complete data set here tracks each addition to the government of Jakarta, the local provincial government, tracks each addition in a CSV file every single day for like every 6 hours. So that was a major help for us. So we recreated this, but we put like kind of specific time, specific time in order for us to track how the government is acting while COVID-19 is spreading throughout Jakarta. Right. So this is the CSV that was given, that can be publicly accessed in this site. This is what it looks like. There's a lot of information here, and originally we wanted to do something like really New York Timesy, where it's like super complicated and kind of like a lot of moving parts. But kind of when we had that coaching session with Kang, he kind of just advised us to kind of make it really simple and kind of just it doesn't need to be a very fancy graphic as long as the point kind of came across. So we kind of reworked our graphics to kind of let's just see how COVID-19 spread over time, and kind of just explain what the government is also doing at the same time. So as soon as we started doing this, so this is like, you can see that this is when the COVID just hit Jakarta. It made landfall, spread from 152 boroughs, 193, and so on and so on. What we kind of realized while we were doing this was that so the LSSD was kind of a thing that was it had a specific period of time, right? The government was supposed to just have it on for 2 weeks at a time, with the option to extend. So the governor of Jakarta extended this the protocols for twice. So it's like, what was it? He extended for like a month each time, and that was supported by the data. So this is in his last. Oh, this is the first time he extended it. At that time, 261, like around 90% of Jakarta was infected, right? And we kind of use Google's mobility data to kind of show that the LSSD is working. This is before the LSSD was enacted, and this is much after that. So like the activity just dropped significantly everywhere. And then we also like tracked, this is Indonesia, case increase, right? But then something changed in June 5. So the governor unexpectedly put the city into a transitionary state. And this is because the president had said, we need to reopen the country. But at the same time, the cases, COVID-19 was everywhere. So the data then reflected that it increased, right? More infected boroughs. And in the week following that announcement, when we are transitioning to a more open society, case count exploded in Jakarta. It's like now like 1,000 in a single day, which has never happened before. So that is kind of the surprising thing we found, tracking the data. And so we didn't expect to find this kind of hole, and then the story kind of changed along with it. So yeah, I think that's it.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much, Krishna. Okay. Sorry, we were also. I think there was some background noise in happening behind you, so that was also in a way blocking off some of your explanation. Unfortunately, because Zoom's audio algorithm, whenever there's like background noise, tends to cut off some of your some of what you said, but I think thank you very much for the very thorough explanation. And like you say, it's always very interesting when you find unexpected, you know, narratives in your data. I'd like to invite you now, the audience, to ask your questions of the team, because there's been some very interesting use of tools, and of course, you know, using data from different government agencies, and plotting, and to see whether it correlates with what decisions governments are making, and also finding new tools like Ray did of text extractor for pattern recognition. If you all have any questions, please put them in the chat box so that we may float them to the presenters as well. And King, is there any other questions that you have for the participants and for the presenters?
I have like one question for Ray. I'm just interested. I'm amazed that you found that tool that allows you to parse the prose, right, to find patterns and to extract the numbers. I'm curious, like, how did you find it? Did you already know that, or actually you Google for it, and then how did you Google for it?
Hi, thanks. So actually, I spent a while looking at a few different options. So as you rightly guessed, I just basically Googled certain keywords like text extract, text recognize, text parse, and there were a few different ones that came out. So one of the issues that I kind of mentioned very briefly earlier on, that I'm just going to put my screen up again, is that when you have a PDF and the MOH always puts it out in a PDF. So even though this is one sentence, it cuts off at the end of the word new here.
Yes.
And then it's very troublesome that way, because when you convert it into a table, every line is a row and every semicolon is a column. So I went through a few different tools. Another one that I found was remove. I found one specifically for removing line breaks. And I tried to basically go through a few of these and put them together. So this one that I found was actually the most useful. And funnily enough, it's actually a tool that's built for DNA sequencing. Because as you can imagine, in DNA, if you know, it's like the ACGT. So the scientists are trying to find a specific sequence of within the genome of within the DNA pattern. So they're looking for that kind of pattern, and they're looking for that kind of to extract that little piece of DNA. So it's not purpose built for what I wanted, but it's fit for purpose. So you can see that there's like DNA sequence editor. It's got like gene set generator. So this is what this tool was built for. But I was able to make it work for my purposes.
Wow. I'm really amazed, man. Okay.
It was quite fascinating that and as Ray noted as well, the press releases come out in this fixed format, so it's easy to pick up that pattern recognition, the text extractor. What is the name of the tool, by the way?
This tool that I was using, it's called Mobio Tools. It's a suite of tools, and I'm just going to paste it in the chat over here.
In the chat, that would be,
so you can have a look at that.
Yes, we have a question for the Tempo team from Adi Marcella. Please describe how to take the mobility report, because so far they only get the resume and not the raw data. Yeah. Tempo team.
I'll take that. If you go to Google Mobility Data, there, you just need to go Indonesia, for example. And so you probably went like this, right? You downloaded PDF because that would just give you the graph that they made. But what you need to do is actually just need to download the global CSV, and then you open that up. So I'm just going to open mine up there. So the global mobility data would give you this data for all the countries. What you need to do is just take the Indonesian ID and then dump it to another CSV file, and then gravy. Okay, that should be it. Hope that answers your question. Sharing.
Yeah, okay, Adi. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, thanks, King, for also the link. Yeah, okay, Adi says got it. Is there any more questions for the participants, for the presenters? If there's not, I will open the floor to vote. So I would ask you, the audience, to cast your votes for first, second, and third place. This is really a competition done in the spirit of, friendly competition, and we hope to make it a bit fun for the participants as well as you, the audience. The winners stand a chance to win, or actually they will win a pair of tickets to WAN-IFRA's either Digital Media Asia conference this year, and if we are unable to hold it in Hong Kong this year, we will of course carry forward the prizes to next year's events in the APAC region. So Digital Media Asia is our largest event in APAC region, and we have like 400 over people attending, and it's all things digital, so lots and lots of exciting speakers and sessions and lots to learn from. And like I said, if we can't hold it this year, and I hope we can, but with the situation now, with the travel restrictions still in place, then we'll be very happy to extend those tickets to the winners next year. So I've opened the poll now, and I'll just request the participants in the audience to vote on their first, second, and third place. And then later, after King gives his presentation, we will unveil the winners, okay, the placements of the winners. So let me just switch on the poll. And yes, I'm going to launch poll now and give you guys the chance to vote. Okay, the panelists don't get a chance to vote. So please vote. You're only allowed to vote one per answer, per question. Yeah, and we'll give you maybe a minute to cast your votes. Okay, and then after that, King, it's over to you to give your presentation on investigating pandemic's impact on vulnerable and marginalized communities with data. Okay. And we will announce the winners just after King's presentation. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Junie. So I'm going to give a very short comments on those projects before I move on to my presentation. All right. Actually, for sort of like I'll go start from the Tempo project, right? That is for me, it's a good data-driven story that uses data and fact-based evidence to question the government decisions in handling the pandemic, right? This type of stories has been done by many media organizations, and this story we see that they integrated the data plus comments from the experts, right, to form a very strong narrative to try to show whether it was a good decision to open up the country. But what I observe is that there are still, minor, I call it friction, the minor friction between the text narrative and the data visualizations, right? I like the scrolly telling approach, where when you scroll, you see that the virus spread to more boroughs, right? And you see the text change. The text will tell you that, okay, this is the second week, or this is the third week, or this is after they relax the restrictions and things like that. So I think this annotations, right, about which stages the data are showing, can be also done in other charts, right? Because some of the charts require the readers to do their own interpretation and analysis to be able to see the information. For example, there's one showing the Google mobility report, right? If you can draw some vertical lines, right, to show that this is when the PSSB started, right? And this is when the holy month of Ramadan started, and this is when the Eid celebration started, right? That will help readers to better understand, to interpret, the movement of the mobility. I think just now, you guys show us, you are trying to explain the mobility report, right? But when your readers look at the chart, there's no one sitting next to the reader to try to explain to them, right? So sometimes those annotations is very important, so that the users can make sense of the charts better, and you're able to connect the charts with your text in a much more better user experience, right? The same goes for the charts that shows the numbers of cases, accumulated cases, right? If you can like draw some vertical lines to show, this is where the PSSB start and this is what happened. So people will be able to link different events, right, along the line to see how those events have affected the numbers of the cases. And the other thing is that another technical thing is that you might want to consider to split the total number of cases into a separate separate chart, because right now it's very hard to see both the total numbers as well as the new numbers and the number of deaths, right? Because the scale is very high. So for those little small bar charts, right, it's really hard to read them, right? So if you split the line graph into another chart, and at the same time you have another chart for the bar charts, right, then you are able to use two different scales and you are able to see the bars clearer, right? So that's some of my comments, right? And I think this project, you can definitely continue to see what happened, after the period that you have covered, right? What happened in the next phase, right? I think this is after you reopen the economy on June 5th until now, it's almost a month. So what happened during that month? Maybe the same approach, and now you already have the technique to get the data, to visualize the data. So you might be able to use to do another data storage to look at what are the developments after that, what are the impacts or what are the consequences of the reopening of the economy. And then I'll move on to the COVID-19 clusters of foreign workers in Singapore by Ray. Although this project is not published, right, but I really like the idea of this story, and this is related to what I'm going to present next, right? And I appreciate a lot the efforts put in by Ray behind the story, to collect the data, to parse the numbers from the PDF file, to clean and to visualize the data. So the story is a very good story. I like it because it attempts to highlight the marginalized, or what we call the unseen communities in Singapore, right, which are the foreign workers. And Ray put it, exactly. The importance of this type of story is to let people understand that those foreign workers, right, they actually live with us. They are not just at the edge of the country, but they are diffused all around the country, and they actually live among us, right? So that is one thing that I think journalists should do, is to let the society see the unseen communities, right, in our society, right, to make people care about the marginalized communities in our society, right? So in terms of technicality, that online tool that he used to recognize the sequence in DNA, that is just fascinating, all right? But you can look at this, that Ray used Google Map, right, not as a visualization tool that published the map, right, but I think she used a Google Map as a tool to actually compile, visualize, and clean the data. Because when you plot those clusters on the map, then you're able to see the pattern, right? The pattern is that, they're all over Singapore, and some of them are focused on the east side, some of them are focused in, they are, north side and things like that, right? And from there, if there's any error, right, for example, one cluster, right, was plotted on a different location, then you are able to spot that and clean the data, right? And then you use this Google Mind Map, then you pass it to your graphic teams, right? And of course, the final map is much refined and attractive, right? But imagine if she doesn't make this Google Mind Map, right? It will be very hard for the graphic teams to produce it, right? If you just pass over, the coordinates and things like that, right? But if you can show that, okay, this is a map and these are all the locations, then I think it makes the graphic teams work much more easier, right? So this is a very good example of why journalists need to equip themselves with data visualization skill, right? Although there's already a graphic team in the newsroom, right? Because the skills can help you to process and to present your story and to facilitate the collaboration between your site and your graphics team's colleagues, right? I really hope that the stories can be published in the future, right? And if you have opportunities to move the story forward, I would like to see more fact-based information about those foreign workers clusters, right? For example, their nationality, who are they, the industry they are in, and their working condition and their living condition, which I believe, is one of the main factors that contributed to the widespread of the virus, within the dormitory, right? So what is their living conditions? Not many people actually understand, what kind of difference and why we keep getting hundreds of new cases every day, although policies have been put in, measures have been put in to try to contain the spread of the virus, right? I think those are some of the questions that you can answer, right, using data, right? And the last project, the election map project, even before I saw what you presented, I already saw the SD stories on the battleground visualizations. I think that is a very good example of showing the right amount of data. You don't have to show everything, but you just shows things that that are important and make it present it in a clear way. So I really like the mini maps that shows each party where do they contest. I think that's a very smart idea. Instead of we like to put everything in the same map, right? But then we expect the users to explore our map, right? Just like the first flourish map that you make, right? The users have to click on each area to see who are the candidates and who are the parties contesting. But actually, it is a better idea to break it down into static maps, mini maps, so that it's much clearer and you don't require the users to interact so much with all these different maps, right? Okay, so those are just some of my comments to all three projects. So I hope that in the future we can see more good projects coming from you guys. Right. Next, I'm going to share a very short presentation on today's. I would like to talk about the data-driven reporting for the voiceless during this pandemic. Right. So just to show you that the current trend is that this pandemic has brought us new audience, because if we see the analytics, right, the consumption of information has actually increased in many countries, right? These are just two examples, one in Indonesia and one in Singapore, right? Because of the pandemic. So we, as journalists, as publishers, right, this is actually a good opportunity for us to present important stories, important informations, and it allows us to build our audience and reach out to new audience during this time, right? But currently, right, if you look at the coverage of the pandemic, right, currently most of the coverage are focused on the left side, which is on the virus and the governments, right? The government or the macro scenario, like the economy, the politics, right? And of course the virus, where how it started, how it develops, how it spreads, right? And we focus a lot on the daily updates, right? But what I'm trying to suggest here is that it is time for us to move from the virus and the governments to the people, right? The people who are affected by the pandemic. So to put in into a more into clearer points is that we have to move from like daily updates, the government responses, how the government responds to contain the pandemic, right? And two, to help readers to understand, so who and where are the most impacted communities, right? How bad it is, okay? And the government has rolled out a lot of different measures, responses to trying to help the people, right, to fight the pandemic, to fight the slowdown in economy. But how effective are these responses, right? Because in the next month or next quarter, right, we are going to see a lot of data coming out regarding the impacts of the pandemic to our economy, to our education, to our health systems. A lot of data is going to come out from there. Starting from now, we are seeing that there are more and more information or data, coming out from the government. So this is the time where we need to really flex our muscles and trying to use those data to tell stories about the people, right? So the other interesting angle is that who capitalize on the vulnerable people, right? There are people who made a lot of money. There are people who made a lot of who are at a advantage position, right? To actually make money or to benefit them during this pandemic. Who are they? Did anyone expose them, right? So those are some of the things that I think we should be focusing right now as journalists. So we all know that this pandemic has widened the income disparity, and it has also increased the rate of poverty in different countries, actually in the whole world, right? So these are some of the headlines that we have seen, right? The new poor, right, or the coronavirus poor, right? They call it, right? So what is the situation in your own country or in your own society? I think that is a very interesting angle that we should explore. So I'm here. There are some examples of several stories. This is done by the Commonwealth magazine in Taiwan. So if you look at the chart on the left, right, it is trying to show the blue colors is actually the GDP, right? So this is the subprime crisis 2009, right? You see that the GDP drop, right? Okay, and this is the the technology bubble, right? The internet bubble, and this is SARS, right? So you can see every time when the GDP drop, right, this red line represents, right, how wealthy the top 20 high income population in a country, how many times their income compared to the 20% poorest, right? So you can see that every time when there is a crisis, this represents the disparity, right? The gap between the wealthiest and the poorest. So each time when there is an economic crisis, right, the gap will widen, right? The gap would widen again, right? So this is 2020, right? We haven't seen the data coming out yet, right? So these are the types of the trends that we can pay attention to. This chart on the right, it's also similar. This is the internet bubble, SARS, and this is the 2009 subprime crisis. And the red line, it's the incomes of the top 20%, the top 20 wealthiest people. And the red line is the bottom 20%, right? So you see that after the subprime crisis, it took them much longer time to come back to the same level before the crisis, right? But for the richest people, it's different. They recover much, much more faster, right? So again, what happened in 2020 to 2022, for example, these 2 years, that is something that we should pay attention to. And there are media organizations that started to pay a lot of attention to the marginalized communities, right? This is another story that is done by the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism. They put up a map of the Manila city. Then they show you, the red dots are where they found the number of cases of COVID-19. And they also show you where are the slums area, right? These are the number of informal settlements, which means the slum area, and usually those are the urban poor, right? And if you read the whole article, the article is trying to highlight that the old methods of fighting this type of health crisis doesn't apply on this pandemic, because there's no way for the poor people living in very crowded situations to observe social distancing, right? To stay at home, they won't be able to survive, if they just stay at home, right? If the facilities is not there, they have to go out to access all the basic infrastructures and things like that, right? So this is one story in the Philippines. The other story I want you to look at is from The Guardian. The Guardian actually found that they published at least 3 stories, right, to show that during this pandemic, right, the worst hit communities is those from the non-white community, right? BAME stands for the Black, Asians, and minority ethnics, right? Basically non-white community, right? And this is a very interesting chart. They look at, in the wealthiest area in London, there are more than one third of those areas are actually gardens, right? Are gardens or parks. In the poorest area in London, the percentage dropped to around 20%, right? So you have less parks, you have less gardens, to go to during the lockdown. Okay, so this shows again the disparity between the rich and the poor, right? And this shows who are more worst hit by the pandemic in terms of financial concerns, in terms of this is showing you the data about the concerns about debt, right? And they found the minority, the non-white minority women are the worst hit during the pandemic, right? Then also they have another story. This is also an interesting one. We all know that during the lockdown, right, there is enforcement going on, right? So if you violated the lockdown order, you might be fined, or you might be in Malaysia, you might be jailed as well, right? And who are those people? Are they the rich people? Or are they the poor people, right? I believe most of them are from the poorer background, right? But who is going to highlight these kind of problems in our society? Okay, so this is a very good opportunity for us to highlight the structural disparity in our society. Right, this is another story done by New York Times. It is using the location data to show that the wealthiest populations are able to stay at home much earlier and also much longer compared to the poorest, because the poorest, they still have to travel for work. Their works require them to make travels, right? But the wealthiest is different. So staying at home is actually a luxury during the pandemic, and the data is able to show us that. Okay, this is another story. This is a series of stories that I think is really good, because this is done by the Marshall Projects. So what they did is that they focus on the pandemic in the prisons, right? I don't think many people cares about what happened to the prisoners, right? Or in Malaysia, we have the clusters, the COVID-19 clusters in the detention center, right? But not many people actually care about, who are these people, right? So Marshall Projects, they have published a series of stories that look at, the number of patients in the prisons, and what have the authorities done, to trying to contain the virus in the prisons, right? But in this story, right, actually what they did is to speed up the spread of the virus in the prisons, right? Okay. You'll be able to download this deck from this link, so you're able to visit all those stories that I have shown you, all right? And if you want to look at more stories about, how do you cover the vulnerables, the marginalized communities, during this pandemic, right? Datajournalism.com, they actually compile a series of data-driven stories that focus on this topic, right? So you can access all the links to the stories that I have just presented if you download the deck from this link, okay? So it's bit.ly/datavoiceless, All right. So I hope that from our region, Southeast Asia or Asia, we are able to see more coverage on these communities. All right. So that's my short presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, King, for that very enlightening and informative presentation. I hope these examples give you all some inspiration as well, because these stories can be so powerful. They can help, number one, inform the public. They can showcase the inequalities, and I think most importantly, they can actually guide government, the authorities, the policymakers, and inform their decision making going forward. Because some of these patterns and some of these trends may not be evident even to the policymakers, and it's only through the hard work of newsrooms like yourselves. Across so many different countries in Asia, we have participants from Indonesia, Singapore, as far as Finland, Spain, registering for this, Mongolia, Japan, and so on. So I hope the takeaways from this webinar really give you inspiration to create really informed reporting going forward. So it remains for me to announce the results of the poll. Okay, and I'm going to share the moment that you all been waiting for. Okay, so we've asked you to vote your first place, second place, and third place, and I think the results are pretty clear. Okay, the winner is Tempo with half-hearted social restriction. Okay, and that's the popular vote of the first place. The second place is COVID clusters in foreign worker dorms and work sites. Congratulations. And the third place is Battleground GE 2020. Okay, all three entries get a pair of tickets to WAN-IFRA events either this year or next year. And we're very, very happy to congratulate the winners for all your hard work. And it is into the spirit of fun as well as sharing. And I hope everybody here today took back something very valuable with them, and which will inform your reporting. I will close the poll now, and leaves me just to thank everyone for coming, the presenters for all your hard work, King for this very informative mini lecture as well, and Google News Initiative for being so generous to make it possible for us to have this training. Okay, and I would also just like quickly to encourage all of you to register for the Asian Media Leaders e-Summit, which is taking place later this month on the 20th to the 23rd of July. Those of you who are WAN-IFRA members, like Singapore Press Holdings and South China Morning Post and so on, Jakarta Post are welcome. Free entry to those who are members of WAN-IFRA. The program is already up, and I will just put that in the chat for you shortly. And please register and attend. We've got some very exciting speakers. We've got Dr. Patrick Soon Xiong, who owns the LA Times. He himself is a scientist and a cancer drug inventor. He will be giving the opening keynote on the 20th of July. Okay, so thank you, everybody. I will wrap up here, and all the best. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye, everyone.